Tommy Pitera was notorious for his cold, twisted nature and insatiable thirst for violence. His actions were so horrific that even hardened gangsters wouldn't dare replicate them. Tommy didn't just kill, he gruesomely murdered and dismembered his victims. It's believed that he took pleasure in these acts. Initially a reserved child, Tommy grew into a merciless killer, driven by an unyielding desire to establish himself as the most brutal figure among all gangsters. Had he not been involved in criminal activities, his tendencies might have led him down the path of becoming a notorious serial killer. The setting shifts to June 1990, Statham Island, New York. Investigators cautiously navigated through the dense undergrowth of a protected site. Armed with shovels and heavy equipment, they tirelessly excavated the area. Word had it that these woods concealed a secret, a clandestine burial ground linked to a notorious gangster. After 3 grueling days of excavation, the team struck upon a grim revelation. Hidden within makeshift graves were grisly remains, body parts carefully stowed in suitcases, a grim testament to the unfortunate souls who crossed paths with the infamous gangster Tommy Pitera. The macabre scene unveiled was enough to unsettle even the most seasoned law enforcement officials. It was beyond comprehension how one individual could inflict such horrors upon others. The sheer ghastliness of the sight, the dismembered bodies laid bare, was beyond the imagination until witnessed firsthand. It was an associate of Spike Rat who ultimately tipped off the authorities. Yet, the informant remains haunted by the memory of that fateful decision. To be honest, I deeply regret what I've done. I had the chance to kill Tommy instead of doing what I did. I cooperated. I betrayed. I would have been better off killing each victim and chopping them into 6 parts: legs, arms, torso, and head. These remains constitute the ultimate proof in one of the most gruesome cases witnessed by the city of New York. For Tommy, this marks the end of a bloodthirsty career that commenced in the streets of a disadvantaged Brooklyn neighborhood where wealthy gangsters were idolized as heroes. Tommy Pitera was born on December 2, 1954, the younger of 2 siblings. He grew up just a few streets away from a 17th-century Dutch cemetery that lent its name to the Brooklyn neighborhood. It's in this predominantly Italian neighborhood that Tony and his elder sister Teresa lived with their parents, Joseph and Catherine. The parents struggled to make ends meet. Joseph, a candy salesman, traversed the 5 boroughs of New York peddling treats like tangy powder and lemon or cinnamon-flavored candies. From an early age, Tommy struggled in elementary school. He was bullied due to his small stature, fragility, and high-pitched voice. In childhood, it's crucial to show toughness, but Tommy wasn't tough. He was a shy and somewhat weak child. As he grew up at Brooklyn's David Bowdy Middle School, Tommy still couldn't integrate. He had no friends and was constantly beaten up during recess. Tommy may have been their target, but he never gave up. Despite being battered, he kept fighting, always ending up on the losing side in these schoolyard brawls. Once alone at home, he'd burst into tears. Over the years, he accumulated an immense amount of anger. They say, beat a puppy tied to a tree continuously, and I assure you that when that puppy grows up, it will bite anyone who comes near. That's what happened to Pitera. During middle school, Tommy struggled to find a way to retaliate. He was fascinated by the TV series The Green Hornet, featuring martial arts master Bruce Lee. Watching Bruce Lee strike lightning fast and defeat villains with incredible techniques and intense concentration appealed to Tommy's desire for justice on the streets. He asked his parents for permission to take karate lessons and fell head over heels in love with martial arts. It became Tommy's greatest ally. He trained religiously, with the dedication of a monk. People who knew him as a child recall that he was always practicing in front of a mirror. His fascination with karate turned into a genuine obsession, boosting his confidence. In the hallways of Lafayette High School, Tommy was a changed person. Fear had vanished. No one dared to trouble Tommy Pitera. Encounters with gangsters in the streets of Greenpoint only fueled his desire for dominance. He watches as tough-looking men gather in the neighborhood clubs. This local mafia controls the strings of the underworld. Tommy Pitera sends his men to meet in these clubs, knowing they are both powerful and wealthy, precisely the kind of life he aspired to. In 1974, at the age of 19, Tommy enters a martial arts tournament. To win, he must defeat this opponent. He crushes them one by one, winning each fight and walking away with the first prize. He secures a scholarship to study karate in Japan and jumps at the opportunity. In Japan, trained by the greatest martial arts masters, Tommy immerses himself in all aspects of Japanese culture. He adopts the mindset, behavior, and diet of the Japanese. He believes this discipline makes him faster and stronger. He devours history books on samurais, warriors trained, fearless, preferring death over surrender. After a year, he remains in Japan, continuing his studies while working in a chopstick factory. When he returns to the United States in 1976, Tommy Pitera is a changed man. His entire body is like steel, solid and swift. Back in his old neighborhood, Tommy is a new man. He frequents bars and gaming spots, rubbing shoulders with the gangsters he admires. Since childhood, he appreciated this lifestyle and the respect it commanded. It was a vital aspect of his life. Tommy sympathizes with a member of the Bonanno crime family named Anthony Bruno Indelicato, a major heroin trafficker. Tommy forms a bond with him, becoming his protege and transporting money for the Bonannos. He travels to Canada to distribute drugs, establishing his name through violence, brutalizing those who haven't settled their debts. His proficiency in martial arts makes him fearless during fights, earning him the nickname Tomic the Rat. Bruno, Tommy's mentor, is also the go-to person when someone needs to disappear. Bruno, nicknamed Bang Bang for executing numerous contracts, teaches Tommy how to kill. Under Bang Bang's guidance, Tommy delves into books on dissection, torture, and murder, acquiring a collection called How to Kill, summarizing various ways to kill someone and dispose of their body. This transitioned Tommy from being a former victim to a specialist in karate and eventually into a gangster. His next step was to commit murder for the first time. Tommy's ambition was for people to call him Tommy Karate, a title that would instill caution. By 1976, Tommy Pitera emerges in his Brooklyn Mafia neighborhood as a transformed man. He's no longer weak, but a master in martial arts, working for the Bonanno crime family. In the late 70s, heroin and cocaine reign as the most profitable drugs. Despite the prohibition on drug trafficking by the New York Mafia, the Bonannos make exceptions. The Bonanno family cared little about anything other than the potential gains represented by narcotics. They identified Pitera as perfect for their operation, a difficult sector where people kill for just a few grams of coke. They needed someone tough, and at 24 years old, Tommy, already a hard man, felt deserving of a promotion. He aimed to escalate from being an associate to being inducted into the Mafia. However, to achieve this, he needed to prove himself by committing a murder on behalf of the Mafia. For Pitera, committing a murder would serve as a means to demonstrate his loyalty and dedication. Loyalty and honor are fundamental values among the Mafia. Having always respected the code of the samurai, Pitera found it easy to relate to the culture and expectations of the gangsters. In 1979 in Brooklyn, Tommy Pitera's mission was straightforward. The Bonanno family provided him with the name and address of a man they wanted eliminated. Beyond that, they provided no further details. Pitera spotted his victim on a Brooklyn street, observing and waiting for the right moment. When the target appeared, the gangster sprang into action, a swift, unfeeling, and efficient murder. He executed the man in cold blood and vanished. Pitera had proven himself. He had crossed a threshold. No longer just a common thug, he was now capable of murder. Bruno Indelicato then introduced Pitera to a big shot in the underworld, Anthony Sparrow. They were at the 10 Periole, and Sparrow was one of the most important men serving the Bonanno family. He was widely known, respected, and feared. Sparrow immediately saw the potential in the young gangster. Pitera could become a reference among the hired killers. With Sparrow's agreement, Tommy was chosen for the supreme honor, to become a true mafioso and a franchise. He took an oath in a secret ceremony attended by other mafiosi. They clasped hands, their guns and knives laid out on the table. He had to burn an image of a saint in his hands, their mantra being that in case of betrayal, they would burn as such. He also pricked his finger and shared blood with the other members. It was highly symbolic. For Tommy, this marked his elevation to an affranchi. He had become a real member of the Mafia. In his eyes, he had hit the jackpot. Now that he was part of the Bonanno family, no one would dare disturb him. He was no longer alone. He was one of them, a full-fledged mafioso. Tommy Karate was entrusted with more responsibilities during the Bonanno family's drug deals. He supervised his own team, entitled to a share of the profits before sending the rest to his superiors. By the early 1980s, Pitera had gained significant trust within the Bonanno family. He was making money through drug dealing, but above all, he was a hitman. If his clients didn't pay, Tommy would execute them. One such client was a dealer named Thomas Salerno. Unfortunately for Salerno, he had the bad habit of delaying payment for his cocaine. After the third time, Pitera had enough. He convinced Salerno to take a ride with him. Once in the car, Tommy pulled out his gun and shot him in the head. He placed the body in Salerno's parked car near the Greifswald cemetery. For all of Pitera's clients, the message was clear. Tommy would say to anyone trying to deceive him, "You know who you're dealing with." With the money from drug trafficking, Tommy Pitera discovered a new lifestyle that was previously unknown to him. He opened 2 bars, the Jazz Lounge, and bought an apartment in Brooklyn. However, he was aware that narcotics trafficking could bring legal trouble. He did everything possible to cover his tracks. He didn't have a phone, using a pager and payphones instead. He always asked to take a stroll in the street when meeting associates, never staying still and usually covering his mouth so no one could lip read. He ensured he wasn't being followed, constantly checking his rearview mirror while driving, jumping from one car to another, or using the classic maneuver of indicating left and turning right became regular practices. He was always on edge, aware of his surroundings. It wasn't outsiders that Tommy feared the most. It was the members of his own gang who might inform the feds about him. He was obsessed with moles and didn't let anyone with facial hair pass by because, moles have mustaches. Tommy carefully chose the people he worked with or even spoke to, almost obsessively. But despite all these precautions, Tommy Pitera is about to let 2 people enter his inner circle. At the end of the 1970s in New York, Tommy Karate Pitera achieved one of his greatest dreams. He became a mafioso and worked for the Bonanno crime family. During the 80s, Tommy made significant profits for the Mafia through heroin and cocaine trafficking. Money flowed, but Pitera had to stay vigilant to escape the police. Constantly on the move, always alert, he ran his team with an iron fist. Yet 2 people from his circle threatened to disrupt this meticulously controlled universe, a low-level gangster and an outspoken woman from Brooklyn. In the early 80s, Pitera married his high school girlfriend, a woman named Carol Bogus. They had a son, but as his responsibilities within the Mafia increased, their marriage fell apart, and the couple divorced. Once again single, Peter sought a woman who could accept his life as a gangster. He found her in Celeste Lipari, a Brooklyn girl, beautiful, curvaceous, and tough. It said she carried herself like a gangster's woman. She knew they were friends, and it wasn't an issue. Tommy falls in love with Celeste. She's fun-loving and easygoing, making her perfect for Tommy. The ruthless gangster softens around her, openly showing affection, something he rarely did with anyone else. Celeste becomes Tommy's great love. But there's a problem. She's a drug addict, using heroin and cocaine. Pitera hates seeing Celeste use and deal drugs. He's aware of what junkies are capable of, and he does everything in his power to help her quit. He even goes to the neighborhood dealers, warning them not to sell drugs to Celeste. However, Celeste doesn't need a dealer to get high. She turns to her friend Philippe Birdie, and they get high together. Tommy disapproves of Philippe, not wanting Celeste to associate with him. Despite Tommy's objections, Celeste continues partying with Philippe when he's not around. In the 80s, cocaine trafficking is at its peak, and Tommy's business thrives. He establishes his headquarters in his own bar, the Justice Lounge, a place reserved for gangsters. If a stranger walks in and orders a beer, they're charged $10, usually scaring people away. In 1986, Fang Angie visits Pitera at his bar after serving time in prison for murder and being short on cash. He orders a drink and is charged $12, prompting him to introduce himself. Tommy could verify Granby's background. He knew Granby's uncles and his brother and was aware of his prison history, but noted that Granby had never snitched, so Tommy trusted him. Pitera took Jay under his wing and employed him as a dealer. Gaji brought in a lot of money for his boss by selling cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. Jay witnessed the respect Gaji commanded and liked the atmosphere, leading them to become quite close. In June 1987, Gaji discovers the dark side of his new boss. One day at the Justa's Lounge, Tommy tells Gaji they're going for a ride. Gaji assumed they were going for coffee, but Tommy turns on the radio to cover their conversation in case the car was bugged by the police. Tommy reveals they intend to eliminate someone that very night. Shocked, Gaji couldn't backtrack. Peter made a stop at one of his men, Richie David, to stock up on ammunition, including guns, silencers, a briefcase, and a hacksaw. Gaji questioned this, but Peter loaded everything into the car and drove to a nearby building. Inside, he met two other men from Peter's crew and a third man, Talal Siksik, bound and gagged. Pitera had heard rumors that Siksik might be a snitch. Tommy took out his gun and shot Siksik twice in the head. Pitera dragged the body to the bathtub and undressed it, also removing his own clothes and neatly placing them near the tub. Gaji discovered the purpose of the hacksaw as Pitera filled the tub with water and began dismembering Talal Siksik's body. I was right there, stunned. He told me to take off my clothes as if I was supposed to figure out what to do. I got a bit annoyed and said, "Calm down, I've never done something like this before." Then he asked me to get the car. Gaji left the apartment. I went out, got the car, and stopped to buy a bottle of alcohol to calm my nerves. I was on edge and drank it all. I couldn't turn back, quite literally. I returned to the apartment. By then, Tommy had completely dismembered the body and placed the pieces in suitcases. "Frank, you'll drive Pete's men," Pitera told me, pointing at the suitcases in the trunk, along with shovels and flashlights. Pitera ordered Gaji to take the Verrazano Bridge to Staten Island. They passed through a woods. When Pitera asked Gaji to stop, they arrived at the Davis Nature Reserve, a protected area. Tommy said it was the best place to bury the bodies, as there would be no construction and less chance of someone accidentally discovering a corpse. Pitera and his men took shovels and the suitcases. Tommy asked Gaji to come back for them 45 minutes later. I was traumatized. It was madness. He was completely crazy, but whatever Gaji's feelings were about this gruesome crime for Pitera, the bonds forged by a blood pact were unbreakable. He started showing me all his weapons, knives, and books. He said, "We're married now." After that, we became closer, but being friends with Tommy Pitera was like descending into hell. In 1987, the gangster Tommy Karate Pitera had already established a terrifying reputation on the streets of Brooklyn. This 33-year-old drug trafficker was also a ruthless murderer who dismembered his victims and buried them in his private little cemetery, a nature reserve on Staten Island. Pitera's methods were extreme, yet he adhered to the rules of the Mafia. Those he eliminated were bad debtors and traitors. However, when it came to executing someone, Pitera was no longer the same. He was not just a mere hitman, but a true monster. Despite his role as a mafia killer, there was still one person capable of bringing out the best in Tommy Pitera, his girlfriend, Celeste Lipari. But Celeste was becoming increasingly uncontrollable. She continued to party with her friend Philippe Birdie, indulging in alcohol, cocaine, and heroin. Tommy's attempts to get her to quit proved ineffective. He tried to convince her to lose that nasty habit, and she tried, but she always ended up relapsing. For Tommy, Missy and Phyllis were to blame for all this. On September 10, 1987, Celeste and Phyllis went to the Run Lambert bar in Brooklyn to have some fun. To ensure they wouldn't run into Tommy, they decided to continue the evening at Phyllis's place with friends already high on cocaine. Celeste injected heroin to fall asleep. She closed her eyes and dozed off, only for her heart to stop beating. Frank Genji learns the news from a friend. Now it's up to him to tell Tommy. Tomek opened the door and I said, "I'm sorry, Celeste is dead." I didn't know how else to tell him. She overdosed, getting ready to go to Phyllis's. The police were already on site when Pitera arrived. The love of his life was there, dead on the floor. Tommy took her hand and began to cry. He said, "I told you to stop the drugs, and what happened?" In walks Phyllis, completely high. Tommy was beside himself. He hit her in the face and said, "I'm going to make you pay for this." Consequently, the cops restrained him and told him to leave. Pitera leaves, but now has a new obsession: to kill Philippe Birdie. And he couldn't stop talking about it. He kept asking me if I had seen or heard anything, and I replied, "She's nowhere to be found." Angie advised Phyllis to leave town. She disappears for a while, but eventually returns to her preferred neighborhood in search of drugs. On September 26, 1987, Angie is having a drink in a Brooklyn bar when Philippe Birdie comes and sits beside him. I said, "Oh God, no." We started drinking. I didn't want to call Tommy because I knew what it would do to him. We continued drinking and having fun. Under the influence of alcohol and drugs, Genji Rahman invites him home. We were partying, but around 10 in the morning we ran out of coke. They went to Genji's friend to restock drugs. 3.5 grams of cocaine mixed with alcohol. They made love and eventually fell asleep. The next day, Angie wakes up to the telephone ringing. Without thinking, he answers. It was Pitera on the line. I thought, damn, what am I going to tell him? He's not stupid. So I said, "It's finished. She's at my place. I was just about to warn you." He replied, "Don't let her get away." Shortly after, Pitera arrives with 2 of his men, a gun, and his usual tools. He asked Gangi for Phyllis's location, and Genji directed him to the room. Genji hears 2 gunshots and then water running. He knows Phyllis is dead, her blood draining into the bathtub. Suddenly I heard Frank saying, "Come here, I've got something to show you." Damn it. I went to the bathroom and saw Phyllis's head separated from her body, placed on the edge of the bathtub. He said, "Frank, you did well. I'll never forget what you've done for me." Pitera orders his men to bury the body near his other victims at the Staten Island Nature Reserve. Rumors suggest that Pitera kept Phyllis Birdie's head and preserved it in his freezer. Celeste's death transformed Tommy. He became extremely gloomy, and those around him said he was even more frightening. Working for Tommy, Frank Genji saw far more than he ever wanted, and he's not cut out for it. Tommy has killed some people in a truly horrifying manner. Efron Genji was involved. Even gangsters and murderers have their limits. He doesn't accept everything. G had reached his limits. Haunted by what he's seen, Genji desperately wants to change his life. But he knows that the slightest misstep with Tommy Pitera could dig his grave. If he wanted to kill you, he would first make you believe you were his best friend before putting a bullet in your head. On a daily basis, he was very unpredictable. Most of his men didn't want to associate with him. Tommy spoke about eliminating someone almost every day. He became a master at it, but this obsession with murder had repercussions on those around him. His gang wasn't united. They stayed together only because they were afraid of him. He was sinister. He was scary. If Pitera thought being more powerful and earning more respect by instilling fear, he was wrong. On October 6, 1987, Frank Genji returns to the nature reserve to bury another victim of Pitera, Mark Buchardsky, dismembered in his suitcases. Pitera had him removed over a head issue. They dug a grave for him, but it probably wasn't as deep as Tommy would have wanted. He had said, "Dig it deep until you reach the water," but they only dug 1 meter deep. Genji grew up in a family of gangsters, but with Pete and Rahi, witnessed atrocities he could have never imagined. On March 15, 1989, Pitera heard that 2 of his men had betrayed him, Richie and the other man. He doesn't have evidence, but he doesn't need it. He is both the judge, the jury, and the executioner. It wasn't informants, but a setup. Tommy had an idea in mind. It was too late. Pitera lured Leone and Stern, making them believe they were onto a big score. A bit later, they went to a nightclub run by Pitera. There was no one except Tommy and 2 henchmen in Billy Bright. Trapped, Honey Stern is handcuffed. Puppy Terrace pulls out his gun and says, "Confess you're a snitch and you'll get it over with before I shoot you." He first shoots Leone in the foot, then left and right to make him turn, almost like making him dance. Overwhelmed by pain, the men fall to their knees. Stern lies, admitting to being a snitch and witnessing everything, but it was unbearable for him. So he shot a bullet into Leone's head to end his suffering. Pitera aims his gun at Stern and shoots. The 3 men drag the bloodied corpses to the bathroom and throw them into the bathtub. Pitera undresses and begins the dirty work. He gets into the tub, takes a hacksaw, and cuts up the 2 bodies. Tommy's continued involvement in murders and dismembering the corpses reveals he was far more twisted and disturbed than anyone had imagined. He was writing and cutting people very regularly, then casually going out to eat pizza with his friends. But his time was running out. In the streets of Gray, DEA agents Tommy Gazole and Jimmy Hunt work undercover to infiltrate the banana traffickers' network. But unsuccessful. The ANC has been tough for years without satisfying results. It was challenging to integrate their inner circle. We were kept at bay because we weren't from the Gref Zangasol. Ron and Gassel posed as thugs and slowly managed to infiltrate the world around the traffickers. During a meeting, one of their contacts spoke of Pitera. He told us about a guy, a hitman working for the Bananos, a big dealer, someone everyone feared. He's not someone to take lightly, he said. Gassel decided to focus on Pitera. They bought drugs from his dealers in search of a lead. Working with federal agents, they tapped his phones, monitored his bars, and followed him in unmarked cars. Tommy looked menacing and exuded a certain animality. He wasn't out much during the day, but mostly at night. He trained in karate, lingered in his bar until 3 or 4 in the morning. Agents tracked Pitera for years but had no substantial evidence. Pitera was always one step ahead. The only way to learn about Tommy was to get one of his close associates to talk or to follow and observe his every move. But Tommy was particularly paranoid, making their task very difficult. On April 10, 1990, Fang Angie was high on cocaine, yet he still took the wheel through the streets of Brooklyn. He was arrested by the police and placed in a holding cell. He reflected on what Peter had made him do. He felt remorse. Genji asked to speak to an inspector he knew. "I have to talk to you. I don't know why I did that," he confessed. The inspector listened to Genji and alerted the federal agents. They came and spoke to Genji, who agreed to cooperate and shared what he knew about Pitera and the years spent alongside him. He interrogated me. They all thought I'd spill everything. Frank Andy allowed us to progress. This guy had committed crimes with Tommy and agreed to talk, Genji disclosed. It was the breakthrough the police had hoped for. In the mid-90s, federal agents were trying to get their hands on the New York gangster Tommy Karate Pitera. One of Pitera's closest allies betrayed him and revealed to investigators all he knew about Pitera and his murderous madness. It was a massive breakthrough. Frank's testimony was the icing on the cake for us. He revealed crucial and highly incriminating information about Tommy. After years of surveillance and working undercover, agents were finally ready to take action to bring Tommy down. June 3, 1990, DEA agents, including Jimmy Hunt, scour the streets of Brooklyn early in the morning. They locate their target, the elusive Tommy Karate Pitera. It was crucial for us, especially with the henchman's history with Tommy, to ensure he would be as surprised as possible when we arrested him. When Pitera stopped at a red light, the agents were ready to intervene. Genji told the others, "As soon as I crash into his car." As Peter Wright stopped his car, it was suddenly rammed. The agents sprang into action and seized him. A witness said we pulled him out of his car, put him on the ground and handcuffed him. Everything happened very quickly. Pitera found himself pinned to the ground in the middle of the street. He tried to resist and ended up with a broken nose. Finally, Pitera was out of commission. However, to strengthen their case, investigators needed to find the bodies of his victims. They turned to Frank Andy, who had witnessed the murders and the disposal of the bodies. He was one of the few living people who could lead them to Pitera's personal cemetery. On June 6th, he led them to the Davis Nature Reserve on Staten Island. Frank accompanied them and claimed he could precisely indicate where the bodies were. He was able to locate the area but shook his head when they ventured deeper into the woods. "Listen, we always came at night, and often I was drunk. I know it's around here, but I don't remember exactly." DEA agents, federal police, FBI, and New York police deployed for 2 days. They combed the area with dogs and the latest forensic equipment, but to no avail. Finally, a detective from the criminal unit had the idea of using metal detectors. They resembled large spikes, and we all combed the area together, digging our metal rods into the ground. On June 9th, the 4th day of the search as the sun set, a New York police officer shouted he had found something. He unearthed a large checkered suitcase containing the dismembered limbs of Mark Bouchard. The agents continued to exhume the remains of Talal Siksik, Philippe Birdie, Lester Stern, and another victim. One of them remarked about Richie covered in tattoos. We opened a bag and I saw a tattoo on a shoulder, so I said, "That's Richard Leon." They were seasoned agents, used to witnessing horrific things, but everyone felt the same thing. This guy was an animal. The discovery of irrefutable evidence continued at Pitera's Brooklyn apartment. Investigators found an arsenal of weapons, books on police techniques, murder and dismemberment. Philippe Birdie's head was never found, but they did find jewelry belonging to the victims. For Jimmy Hunt, all these pieces of evidence only confirmed Pitera's profound perversion. It was hard to believe, but it was true. This guy had studied how to dismember bodies and cut people. Investigators suspected that Pitera might have committed over 50 murders in total. With their evidence and Genji's testimony, Pitera was charged with 7 murders and drug trafficking. On May 6, 1992, Tommy Pitera's trial began at the Brooklyn courthouse. Fang Angie was the key witness. I had never felt so bad. I became a traitor. I had betrayed him by speaking about Philippe Birdie's murder. Genji started crying during a recess at Pitera's trial. Pitera, who was there, said to him, "Are you happy now, you crybaby?" Genji's testimony was a blow to Pitera. It associated him with numerous murders and corroborated the physical evidence. Pitera was never called to the stand. He couldn't testify due to his involvement in organized crime. Tommy would have preferred to die rather than risk compromising one of his friends by speaking. On June 25, 1992, the jury reached a verdict. Tommy Pitera was found guilty of 6 murders. The question remained whether he would receive a life sentence or the death penalty. He asked his lawyers how they would be killed in case of a death sentence, most likely by injection. He responded, "No, if I have to die, I want it to be him who kills us." He pointed at someone, saying, "I want him to kill me." Pitera was right. The jury rejected the death penalty and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Frank's Genji, the man who sent him behind bars, is still haunted by all those crimes and his decision to confess. I would prefer to die than to have started. I don't know what weighs on me the most today, the murders or the betrayal. Today, Pitera is held at the Federal Correctional Institution in Allenwood, Pennsylvania. According to him, he's locked up for life simply because he refused to inform on other gangsters. There's nothing positive to say about Tommy Pitera. He was a sick, cold-blooded murderer. Tommy was the ultimate ruthless killer, someone who could kill almost anyone without hesitation. What set him apart was how easily he killed and the pleasure he derived from it. The Mafia world and its environment were perfect for him. It gave him the right to kill. He gained status every time he committed a murder. The more extravagant, the more feared he became. All of this contributed to perpetuating the myth and reality of Tommy Pitera. If you've enjoyed this video and want more heart-pounding content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.